All right, guys. Hey, welcome back. Continuing the discussion on civil rights, integration, and so forth. Again, I encourage you to talk to, maybe ask your grandparents if they went to a school where there was busing. We just stopped the busing in Wichita. I think it was a couple, like 3 or 4 years ago. We were still busing students from one part of town to the other. This has kind of come full circle in a lot of ways, where if you look at a lot of African American communities, which were the ones that were, the most affected by this segregation of schools, have kind of turned and said, you know what, we need to go to school in our communities and be proud of our communities, be proud of our culture, and teach kids the things that we want to teach them. That is local control over schooling, which generally Mr. Ebrights supports, right? I mean, I think if people want to have that and they don't want to be bused to another part of town, as long as the facilities, the teachers, all the things that you need to educate children, as long as the finances are there and people want to do that, I take no umbrage against that, okay? But I want to finish this story on the Little Rock situation. So yesterday I'd finished talking about Eisenhower acting, okay? Some people criticize him that he was slow to act, okay, until there was violence, okay? So Eisenhower orders the Arkansas National Guard into federal service, so the governor couldn't use them, okay? The judge had already done that, but the president now federalized the Arkansas National Guard, okay? He orders in 1,000 paratroopers. It's the 101st Airborne. Okay, now these people do not paratroop into Little Rock like, something out of Red Dawn, okay? They come in on trucks and so forth. But basically, guys, you can see this picture here. These are famous photographs. Look at this, guys. Bayonets attached. They're going to escort these students. This is a U.S. Army vehicle. It's going to pick them up and bring them to the school and then escort them into the school. Not only into the school, but they are going to have soldiers assigned to each student. And they will follow that student from classroom to classroom and be posted right outside the door, bayonets attached. Okay, this is what it took to integrate Little Rock Central High School. Okay, it sounds absurd, it sounds crazy, but it was real. I mean, this is changing culture, and some people didn't like it. Okay, and so there were fights over this. The problem with the Brown versus Board of Education is it said to integrate schools with all deliberate speed. That doesn't say this year. That doesn't say next year. It says with all deliberate speed. What does that mean? That's open to interpretation. Okay, so it really became incumbent upon the states and local school boards to do this on their own. Okay, it wasn't directed by the Supreme Court. They don't have a sword. Okay. So this is where the executive branch, Eisenhower, steps in and says, okay, here's the sword, or the bayonet, if you will, to integrate these schools, okay? So this was in September of 1957. Of course, all the news cameras are there. They're showing this, okay? In the next fall, when school came around, the governor closed the schools. He says, well, you can't integrate the schools if they're not open. Okay, they did this in Virginia as well, which brings me to this point of the movie Remember the Titans. Okay, and I know a lot of you guys have seen this, and if you haven't, you need to. Okay, because there's so much just based on a true story that happened in Virginia. Okay, this battle for immigration is going to be long and hard. I think I got a slide I'll show on this. I'm going to look it up. I'm pausing this. I'll be right back. You won't even know I'm gone. Okay, so I went and looked for this PowerPoint I had produced. I can't get into my hard drive at school, but I looked some stuff up to kind of show you some things. So I went to school in my first 2.5 years of high school in Indiana, a suburb of Indianapolis called Carmel. It's a wealthy suburb. It still is today. I was there last year, and it's a beautiful town. It's a big high school. When I was there were 2,100 students in the school, so almost double the size of what we see at Bishop Carroll. Guys, it was about as white as you can imagine. There were, I think, 2 black kids in the whole school, and they were both like, foreign exchange students from Africa. There were very few Latino and Asian students. There were a couple, but not very many. It was about as lily white as you could find. So that was halfway through my junior year. We packed up and moved to Florida, and I ended up going to Escambia High School. And Escambia High School is very diverse. It's about 40% African American and about 60% white. Now, obviously, today there's a lot more Latino students across the country, but there were some. I mean, there were American Samoas and all kinds of folks there at Escambia High School. And so I was really never had been around black people. You could say I was ignorant of, just being around black folks. And so my first day in English, I sat down and I was sitting next to this guy. Okay. This is Patrick Moore. Okay. He's now the head strength and conditioning coach at the University of Texas. Okay. Here's another good picture of Patrick Moore. Okay. So this is the guy I sat down next to. He went on to play linebacker at the University of Florida, and then obviously he's done very well for himself in the area of football and strength and conditioning. But Patrick was a big guy in high school. I'm this little scrawny 5'9" kid, and he was very intimidating to me. I was scared of Patrick Moore. But I tell you what, he was one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. We also had a very famous teammate. He went to Florida to play linebacker. So did this guy. He went to Florida to play running back. And he was Emmitt Smith. Now, I know this is kind of dating me, but if there's any Dallas Cowboy fans, this was the most highly recruited athlete. He was a year behind me. And he went on to become the all-time leading rusher in the NFL history. Okay, Emmitt Smith with the Cowboys. Okay, we won 2 state championships while we were there. Now it's kind of interesting because if you have seen this movie, Remember the Titans. Okay, and if you haven't, guys, take some time to watch this. It's a great movie based on a true story out of Virginia, where they integrated the high school, and it really shows the ignorance of each other, blacks and whites towards each other, and this kind of figuring it out. Now Denzel Washington plays an African American coach, and then this fella here, the white coach. Well, the school board said, we're going to integrate these 2 schools, and the black coach is going to be the head coach, and the white coach is going to be the assistant coach. And this, they go through all these trials and tribulations. And in the end, because the school as a whole is also integrating, it is the football team that kind of sets the path, shows the way for the rest of the student body, that these guys become like brothers. And so that, it makes it okay for the rest of the student body. Okay. Well, when Emmitt was at Escambia High School, okay, we were the Gators. Okay. Now the team mascot used to be called the Escambia Rebels. And the Rebels, that goes back to the Civil War, guys. The Rebels were the South that were fighting to hold on to the institution of slavery. And there were race riots at my high school in the 1970s, okay? I went there in the 1980s. And so generally people, black and white students, got along. But really the football team, if you go into the lunchroom, the cafeteria at lunch, you see this at Northwest High School, at West High School. You go in there at lunch, you're going to see self-segregation. You're going to see black kids sitting with black kids, white kids, Latino kids. You see a little bit of that at Bishop Carroll. You do see a great intermingling, I think, at Bishop Carroll, which I do look. I walk through the lunchroom and I see it. But anyhow, this, by the football team, which was very diverse. A couple of my best friends in high school were offensive linemen. And so they were the ones that were blocking for Emmett on those 2 state championship teams. And when Emmitt Smith went into the Hall of Fame, the National Football Hall of Fame, okay, ESPN did this really kind of cool thing. They brought back a bunch of the teammates, and they did it at the high school, and they did kind of a Q&A with Emmett. And the guy that was asking him questions could see just a big mix of black kids and white kids. And he asked Emmett about that. He said, how did you guys get along with the diversity that you had? And Emmett responded to this. And he says, I didn't see anybody as black or white. I saw these guys as my brothers. These were my teammates. And in fact, my buddy Mark and Billy that were on the offensive line, they've been blocking for Emmett since they were in like Little League football, Pop Warner football, they call it. And I mean, they've been together forever. Emmett's dad was a city bus driver. Emmett wasn't the smartest guy in high school, as either was I. But I'm really proud of what Emmett did. I mean, not just on the football field, but he's a guy he's a commentator on TV. He's done very well, and hasn't forgot about, us people back at Escambia High School. And then, just my ignorance of black people being afraid of Patrick Moore here, who's a very large black man sitting next to me in English class. It took me a little while to culturally adjust, but ended up having a lot of friends of many different races and backgrounds in high school those last 2 years. So I just want to share that with you. And if you've seen this movie or haven't, this is really a great example. If we look at our schools all across the country, okay, we have diverse schools. And if you talk about funding those schools and the importance of football programs, and I know a lot of people don't like, I'm a baseball coach, so I'm like at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to important sports, okay? Football is hugely important to these inner city high schools that are diverse, because the teammates that spend all this time together of different races and backgrounds, they can set a great example for the rest of the student body. Okay, so I just something I like to talk about, okay, and my experiences with that, okay. So moving forward, we talk about the civil rights movement nationally, okay. Obviously, this is happening at local level, okay, but we start to see, Supreme Court cases and major protests and so forth. And of course, these are 2 names that you've heard of, okay. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, okay? Now, Dr. King was born in Hot, Georgia in 1929. Morehouse is a traditionally black college. He graduated from there and then got his doctorates in theology from Boston University, which, as you can imagine, was a pretty white school. But Dr. King really made his name after the Rosa Parks incident. And so I'll get into that in just a minute. But a lot of historians would look at Dr. King and say, okay, well, who is this man? What is he about? What is his message? Okay. And you look at other African-American leaders in American history. This is W.E.B. Du Bois, okay, and this is Booker T. Washington. You've probably heard of Booker T., who was really a leader for African Americans in a practical way. He's the guy that came up with the idea for the Tuskegee Institute. Remember when we talked about the Tuskegee Airmen, where they learned to fly during World War II? To quote him, Booker T said, throw down your pail and work. Teach African Americans how to be good have a good work ethic and teach them skills so they can go out and show people that they can be great members of society. So it's more of a practical approach. When I was growing up, they used to name elementary schools and high schools Booker T. Washington High School. Okay. Excuse me, not as much anymore because thinking has changed more along the lines of Du Bois here, or Du Bois, however you want to pronounce it. He was more impatient. He wanted all your rights, all of them now. He wanted equal treatment for blacks. It was a very impatient movement for him, and he's actually became so frustrated. He's kind of a communist too, and he actually left the United States and went back to Africa, went to Liberia. So Booker T's Dr. King has a little bit of both of these guys in him. He's got the impatience to push the envelope, to push for rights, for equal treatment, and so forth, but also the practicality to know that this isn't going to happen overnight. Okay, so in 1955, Rosa Parks lived in Montgomery, Alabama. And guys, there's a lot of African Americans in Montgomery. I've been there, okay? And most people, in a kind of an urban area like that, a lot of people ride the bus, both black and white. And the buses were segregated. So the white people sat at the front and the blacks had to sit in the back. And if the white section was full, okay, and another white person got on the bus, they could force a black person to move further back in the bus in the black section. And this had happened to Rosa Parks and other people. And she was working with the NAACP, and they were going to try and bring a lawsuit here. Because this was a section reserved for African Americans. And so that day came, and she refused to give up her seat. And so the bus driver pulled over the bus, flagged down a police officer, and she was arrested. Okay. They were ready. The NAACP had lawyers, and they began a lawsuit about segregation of buses. Okay. And eventually this is going to make its way to the Supreme Court. Okay. But at the same time, the African American community is going to be led by Dr. King. That's when he goes to Montgomery and leads the bus boycott. Okay, so let me go back. I'm going to skip a slide here. Okay, and the Montgomery Bus Boycott. So for 381 days, not one black person rode the bus. Okay, now guys, what do you ride the bus for? You ride the bus to go to the store. You ride the bus to go to work. So people are literally having to walk to work. That means leaving your home, an hour, 2 hours early to walk to work. This is complete solidarity, and that type of thing doesn't happen without great leadership, okay? And so Dr. King was there with people, and he's like, telling them, we have to stay together on this. We have to do this peaceful protest, this boycott, okay? And so it worked. The Supreme Court finally ruled in their favor that segregation of city buses is unconstitutional. No kidding, right? These nonviolent protests began to work, okay? So where does Dr. King get these ideas to become this leader of this movement, or one of the leaders of this movement, okay? Well, he gets it from, he's a pastor. He gets it from Christ. He gets it from history, from other people that did the same thing, like Mahatma Gandhi, okay? Now, if you've never heard of Gandhi or seen the movie or read about him, he's an Indian, okay? And as you guys remember, the British had conquered India, and South Africa and other places. Well, Gandhi was actually able to be educated in England, which is one of the benefits of British rule, and he became an attorney, became a lawyer. He moved to South Africa, which was controlled by the British, to practice law. Well, in South Africa, guys, the minority of the population is obviously white people, but if you're walking down a street in South Africa, or on the sidewalk, okay, and there's a white person walking down the sidewalk and a black person is coming towards them, black people were told to step off the sidewalk, allow the white people to pass by, and then they could get back on the sidewalk. Well, Gandhi, as an Indian living in South Africa, had to do the same thing, and this really began to affect him, and just, how wrong this was. And so he moved back to India and began peaceful protests against the British policies and British rule, for that matter. And he's going to get his way. It's going to take a lot. We're talking hunger strikes, peaceful protests. Dr. King is going to follow in these footsteps, okay? And then also the transcendentalists, the thoughts of like Emerson and Thoreau. And you guys know me, I'm probably this really deep transcendentalist, right? No, I'm not. But I love this quote from Henry David Thoreau, okay? The state, the government, is not armed with superior wit or honesty, but with superior physical strength. I was not born to be forced. I will breathe after my own fashion. Let us see who is strongest. Okay? That's a statement about freedom, okay? And the strength of free people. And so this kind of thinking goes into the peaceful protests. And I know some students that don't really think about these things very often. You have to take into consideration here. Why do we get a day off from school? Why is a national holiday for Dr. King? It's because he led this peaceful protest movement, okay? If you use violence against violence, and let's say you take the Malcolm X approach or the Black Panthers approach, which is more confrontational, what are people going to say? They're going to say, see, these people are violent. We can't deal with this. We need a separation from these people. Okay, same thing with these high school students, guys. These high school students in Montgomery, they were faced with all types of bullying and mistreatment and so forth. They had to restrain themselves, because if they fought back against those that were being cruel to them, guess what they're going to say? They're going to say, well, see, we told you, they're violent, they can't be in the school with my lily white kid, okay? And 8 of the 9 students graduated. The one that did not graduate was expelled, and I'll tell her story. She's a tall African-American young lady, and she's in the lunchroom, and this small white kid's he's being nasty to her, right next to her. Well, they were having chili, and she finally had enough. They were having chili at lunch, and she took a bowl of chili, and she dumped it on this white kid's head. They made an example out of her. She didn't get suspended. She got expelled, okay? So, this is a very difficult situation, and it's going to take time, okay? It's going to take a long time. But the leadership of Dr. King, okay, the peaceful protest, people like Rosa Parks that stood up for this, they're going to get the benefit. The rest of society is going to benefit from these folks, okay? Now, so by 1960, blacks are sitting at lunch counters, swimming pools, and that brings me to the situation. And I will post this link on the post today. It's Dockham Drugstore, okay, here in Wichita, okay. And there's a short little video on it. There's a lot more on this, guys, you can read about when you talk about Dockham Drugstore. But there was a sit-in down in North Carolina, Greensville, North Carolina, that the major media focused on. So that's when we talk about the lunch counter, where African-American students would come and sit at the counter and just ask to be served. They would be refused service. They would be bullied. They'd had stuff thrown at them and so forth. They dressed nice. They came in, come back the next day and just ask for a milkshake or a cheeseburger and, be very polite about it. And they would be refused service. Now, if you can imagine yourself, guys, being somebody that works at the drugstore or at the soda fountain that they called them at the time, and these people. These are people in your community. They're being very nice. They have money. They want to spend it in your store, and you're having to refuse them service. I think it took some time but eventually people were like, yeah, this is stupid. Okay, so last slide here, and then I'm going to do one more lecture tomorrow. So there's a list here of civil rights laws that we have. In August of '57, Justice Department brings suits on behalf of blacks denied voting rights. This is, Truman did this as well. And then in the 1960 election, both parties, Republicans and Democrats, favored desegregation. And then the landmark piece of legislation, remember we talked about things like affirmative action, 1964 Civil Rights Act. And you can see Dr. King is able to be there. This is Lyndon Johnson signing it. Dr. King's able to be there to witness the signing of this landmark legislation. Okay. So progress was made throughout, we go back since the Civil War, different leaders, different movements. And by the 60s, it's really ratcheted up. And now we're in 2020, guys. So, like I said, I was in the 80s. I went to high school, and 2020, it is a land of opportunity. This country, there is still discrimination. I don't know if we will ever get rid of it. There's human nature involved here, and humans are fallible. And so I do think we've made extraordinary progress in this country, and most races every day mix and get along with each other without, very few problems. When there is a problem, the media will sure let you know about it, okay? And they will blow it up because that makes news, and that's ratings, and gets people fired up. So I'm going to knock it off there, guys, and I'll be back tomorrow with another lecture, just some of the changes throughout America, changes we see here during this era to the United States, okay? Have a good day. Hope you enjoyed that.